Good morning. Hi. It is great to be here all together again as our two congregations are together for the summer. I hope Talitha would be asleep. She's wide awake. She has not napped this morning, so it's going to be interesting. So yeah, she might cheer me on, we'll see. Or she might heckle me, we don't know. We're going to kick off with a question, which is, I don't know what your natural instinct is when people point out your faults. Have a think. I am a maths teacher, but I'm currently on maternity leave. And at my school, at the beginning of every last period of the day, we have 10 minutes of silent reading. Well, we try to have 10 minutes of silent reading. And I have taught one of my GCSE classes, and in that class there is a kid who always, without fail, gets out his Bible and he reads it. We're a Catholic school, so it's not something that out of the ordinary to see someone with a Bible. But this student would often frustrate me. He was okay at maths when he had his mind in the right place, but he would always, in just about every lesson, fall asleep. I'm not a boring teacher, I'd just like to point that out, but he would fall asleep, and it wasn't just my lessons. Anyway, on this particular day, I was having a really rubbish day. I was fed up, I didn't want to be there anymore, and I ended my day with this GCSE class. And I was probably quite short with them, I was probably sarcastic, I was probably a little bit rude with them. And one student noticed this, and he said to me, "Miss, you're really not having a good day, are you?" And my response was, "Oh, really? What makes you think that?" I know. Anyway, I could see this student later on in my lesson who falls asleep, who reads his Bible, nudging the person next to him, saying, you need to tell her, you need to tell her. And he's like, "No, I'm not telling her." And I'm helping somebody, and I can hear them. I'm going, "Boys, what do you need to tell me? Just tell me what you need to tell me. I can deal with it." Anyway, and then this hesitantly, he goes, "Well, miss," and he picks up his Bible and he says, "I just think you need a bit of Jesus in your life." I know. I cannot believe it, to be honest. I cannot believe it. I had no response. And thinking back to this, it is amusing. But also, in that moment, I haven't forgot it, in that moment, God convicted me that something in my life was not quite right. So this morning, we are going to spend time delving into Psalm 32. It is a psalm about confession and forgiveness. And as well as this, it shows us a God who delights to forgive us. We can often think about confession, about coming to God with all the things we have done wrong in thought, word, and deed. And this is absolutely correct, but I think it's also so much more than this. I think confession allows us to see a God who is faithful, a God who is our judge, a God who brings joy, a God who protects, a God who cares, and a God who is good. And to be honest, the list probably goes on. So, let's read Psalm 32. How joyful is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. How joyful is a person whom the Lord does not charge with iniquity, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones became brittle from my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was drained as in the summer's heat. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not conceal my iniquity. I said, "I will confess my transgressions to the Lord," and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let everyone who is faithful pray to you immediately. When great flood waters come, they will not reach him. You are my hiding place. You protect me from trouble. You surround me with joyful shouts of deliverance. I will instruct you and show you the way to go. With my eye on you, I will give counsel. Do not be like a horse or a mule without understanding, that must be controlled with bit and bridle, or else it will not come near to you. Many pains come to the wicked, but the one who trusts in the Lord will have faithful love surrounding him. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous ones. Shout for joy, all you upright in heart. So in verses 1 and 2, we see a part of God's character. we see that God can forgive, and through forgiveness there is joy. And what David is doing here is kind of setting the scene for the rest of the psalm. Notice that he says the same thing 3 times. He says, our transgressions are forgiven, our sin is covered, and he does not charge with iniquity. This is what God does. He can and he will forgive. So why can he do this? I often enjoy reading the New City Catechism, and every now and then, although I haven't had much time recently, I try and memorise the questions and the answers. And one of the first questions is, what is God? And I think I know this one. It says, God is the creator and sustainer of everyone and everything. He is eternal in his power and perfection, goodness and glory, wisdom, justice and truth. Nothing happens except through him and by his will. God is eternal and he is perfect. There is nothing ugly and there is nothing wrong with him. This is who God is. This is his character. He is the sinless one, and he is therefore the one who can and will joyfully chooses to forgive. These beginning verses, like I said, are kind of David setting the scene like in a story. It's telling us the end before it's even started. David is looking back and he's telling us what he knows about God and what he has learnt about God. So from verse 3, we begin to meet David in that story. We've just seen that God will forgive those whose spirit there is no deceit. And now we turn to David and we see that he is struggling in his sin. And not only that, he's struggling to confess his sin. David is often pictured as the greatest king of the Old Testament, the man who defeated Goliath. Jesus is from the line of David, so surely he is a pretty impressive guy. And in many ways he was, but he was still an ordinary man. He was still somebody who experienced sin, and he was still somebody who struggled to bring it to God. And so what happened to David when there was that lack of confession? Well, we read that his silence led to brittle bones, he was groaning, his strength was drained as in the summer's heat. We are, coming to the end of our 4th heat wave. Oh my goodness. It's been terrible for me. Our house is so warm all of the time. I cannot get it cool. I have a 5-month-old daughter who constantly wants feeding to keep hydrated. I'm sweating. And it's disgusting. And lots have actually asked me how Talitha has coped in the heat, and she has been fine. She has been absolutely fine. She's known no different. It's been me. I have struggled, and all I have wanted to do, I've just wanted to sleep. But even that has been too difficult. And I don't help myself because I always need my 10.5 tog duvet. I know. I need to get rid of it, but I can't. So whether David physically felt these pains or whether they were metaphorical, David was probably experiencing strong emotions, a tiredness, and a lack of wanting. So where was God in all of this? David hadn't confessed his sin. So did God care, or was David left to deal with this alone? Well, in verse 4, we get our answer. It says, "For day and night your hand was heavy on me." So what does that mean? Where was God? Well, he was there. God was right there with him. God had his hand upon David, and David knew it. God knew David's sin, and he caused David to feel a conviction. So how can we ever think we can hide our sin away from God? We can't. He knows all things, and he is with us in all situations. So what does that mean for our own lives? Well, God's with us. He's with us in the good times and in the not so good times. But when we are struggling with our own sin, it can feel like God is far. And sometimes the temptation is to carry on with those sinful behaviours. But even in those moments, God is wanting to draw near to us. His hand is heavy on us, and he wants us to become aware of our own sin and to come back to him in confession. that kid that I mentioned at the start, I believe God was using him to bring to my own knowledge my sin and to come back to God in confession. God's hand was heavy on me through a student in my class, an annoying student in my class. I wasn't expecting that. But God speaks to us through different ways, whether through reading his word, whether through people, creation, situations, and so on. So how is God using the things around you to make you aware of how much you need his presence? So David becomes aware of his sin and aware of his need for confession. So when we get to verse 5, we see David make a decision. David decides to come to God in confession. He says, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord. And so what did God do at that point then? Well, God forgave. God didn't say, well, David, you know what? You really made me feel upset and I felt these things and I just don't know. That's sometimes how I can respond to an apology, just ask Fergal. But instead, it appears as if there is no hesitation in God's forgiveness. God knew the heart of David, and God forgave. Confession is a little bit like taking out the bins. I absolutely despise taking out the bins. And conveniently, Fergal is always away on bin day. Always. The thought of touching a bin bag is disgusting. The thought of it breaking makes me feel sick. I feel so uncomfortable. And you can probably relate. But once the bins are out of my house, once I have done that terrible, awful job, Fergal, I hope you're listening, I feel so much better. And it gives me space to do something in the house, I don't know, relax, chill, I don't know. But if I were to leave that rubbish in my house when Fergal is away, something worse happens. Leaving that rubbish in the house is so much worse than just taking it out. If I left it, my house would stink. I would have Talitha's nappies everywhere, and nobody wants that. I certainly do not. It's so much easier just to take it out and have a clean house. And confession is a bit like this. It can make us feel uncomfortable when we do it, but if we do not do it often, our hearts are always messy and unclean. We take communion every week because we believe as a church it is right to confess, but it is also right to know the presence of the Lord close to you through the cup and the bread. This psalm doesn't talk about how we can forgive people, but I just wanted to mention that for us, forgiveness might not seem as simple. Forgiveness can be hard, it can be a process. We might need to talk situations through with others. And you might think at times, why can I not forgive like God without any hesitation? But in those times, we need to remember that God is the eternal one, the sinless one, the perfect one, the one who knows the state of our hearts. But we are humans. We don't see things in the same way as God does. And we don't know everything from the beginning to the end. So that can mean that for us, forgiveness requires more work. But we believe in a God that took all sin on his shoulders and took it to the cross. And through that, we can forgive because he first forgave us. So what can we do when we are struggling to forgive? We can pray to a God that will give us all that we need in the times that we need it. So now we've seen that, David has confessed his sin and God forgave. And David could have stopped the psalm there. But instead, he goes on to verse 6 by saying, therefore, let everyone who is faithful pray to you immediately. Here it's like David is saying, do not be like me. I've learned the hard way. You don't have to be like me. Pray and don't delay. We love Talitha. She has brought so much joy to our lives, and I think she might be asleep. But we have got no idea what she is going to be like as she grows and develops. Our hope is, though, that Fergal and I can use our experience that we have to teach Talitha not just to be like us, but to be so much better. But that does not mean Talitha will not make her own mistakes. She absolutely will, but our hope is that she will be in a better position than Fergal and I have been to deal with them. And I feel like David is saying something similar here. He's saying, don't be like me, learn from my ways, and do not delay. David does not say, do not sin, but he's saying, do not delay coming to God when you do. David says that everyone who is faithful should pray. So who are the faithful? Fergal and I, we love watching The Traitors on BBC. It's amazing. So every time I hear the word faithful, I just think of that question, are you a traitor or are you a faithful? And basically, the premise of the show is that people are chosen to be faithfuls and people are chosen to be traitors. And the faithful want to banish the traitors. They don't want them. Because at the end of the game, there is a cash prize. If there's only faithful left, all of the faithful get the cash. If there's a traitor in that group, the traitor gets all of the money. So in the game, the traitors have to deceive the faithful. They have to act faithful, but they are actually the complete opposite of it. So here, the faithful are those whose spirit there is no deceit. So this is what David is talking about when he's referring to the faithful. And it continues to say what happened to them. When the flood waters come, they will not reach him. Where have we seen flood waters in the Bible before? My mind immediately went to Noah's Ark and Moses parting the Red Sea. And God, in both of these stories, is casting his judgment. He's wiping out the traitors so that the faithful may prosper. God casted his judgment in both of these situations, but not only did he do that, he provided a means of salvation. Noah had an ark, Moses had a staff, and both were instructed with what to do with it. God protected them from trouble in their time of need, and God will do the same to us. God knows that we will mess up and we will get things wrong. But he wants us to come to him acknowledging that we have gone our own way, but we want to come back on track with his way. And what does God do when we come back to him? He surrounds us with a joyful shout of deliverance. Think about the parable of the prodigal son for a second. The father's son asks for his inheritance. He goes off. He spends it all, ends up eating with the pigs, and then he realised that he was not getting the satisfaction from his life that he thought he was going to get. And he realised he needed to go back and seek his father's forgiveness. At this point, the father could have been angry and resentful. His son basically wished him dead. And yet, we read in the Gospel of Luke that while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. What a response. The father surrounded his son with joyful shouts of deliverance. And God does the same thing with us when we turn back to him. He sees us, he runs towards us with such joy. And we see David say a similar thing in verse 10. God is faithful to those who trust him. God was faithful to Noah and faithful to Moses. Both trusted and believed in the promises of God. So now we get to verse 8 of the psalm, and there's a change. It's no longer David talking, but instead it is God speaking. And I don't have as much to say on this because I think God is actually being really clear. It starts by saying, I will instruct you and show you the way to go. With my eye on you, I will give you counsel. As a teacher, I am constantly having to deal with behaviour management. And I knew that I was going to have to do that when I signed up to be a teacher, but I just didn't quite realise how hard it was going to be. Behaviour management is difficult. It's a challenge. But behaviour management, what I've learnt is, it doesn't just mean calling out the wrong behaviours in my classroom. Often, if I just tell a student what they are doing wrong, like this kid who always falls asleep, they will probably show the same behaviours again in my lesson. Why is that? I haven't actually taught them anything. I might be teaching them about a bit of maths, how to solve a quadratic equation, I don't know. But I haven't taught them how to regulate their behaviour in my classroom. A student needs to know what is acceptable, but they might also need a bit of support to change their behaviours. I cannot expect an instant change. I need to walk with them through their change, and it might take all 5 years of their secondary education. Who knows? Or it might take a week. But this is what God does here. He walks with us. You can come to God in confession, and you can acknowledge that you have done wrong. The likelihood is that you will stray away from God's ways again and need to come back to him. And God, he could just leave you alone in this never-ending circle. But God wants you to grow. He wants to sanctify you, and he does not want to leave you. So he instructs you and he guides you. And God says he will do this. There isn't any might or maybe about it. If I get busy with my job, I might forget about that student I said I would meet up with at lunchtime, or that detention. But God isn't like that. God is true to all of his promises. And God doesn't just give you a promise, he also gives you a command. He tells you not to be like the horse and the mule without understanding. God will instruct and guide, but for this to be of any use, you and I should be people who want to follow and not be ignorant to his guidance. If the band could come back up. So what does that psalm mean for us then? Well, I think there are 3 things. Firstly, we can pray and confess immediately without delay. We've already had our time of communion, a time of confession, but is there anything that you are holding onto that you haven't yet confessed to the Lord? Why don't you take a moment just to think? And remember, we come to a God who is ready to forgive. He knows our hearts. Secondly, we can follow God's instruction. So are there any areas in your life where you are struggling to follow the guidance of the Lord? Why don't you now ask him for insight into why you are struggling to follow? And we can be glad and joyful in the Lord. In verse 11, it says, "Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous ones. Shout for joy, all you upright in heart." We are called the righteous ones. We are righteous before God, and that standing does not change despite our failures. So do you know that you can always rejoice? In our beginning verses, we saw that God has joy in forgiveness. The first verse, "How joyful is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered." This is also quoted in Romans 4, speaking of our justification by faith. We are justified before Christ. So how can we be called righteous people? Only through the sacrificial blood through Christ Jesus. We can't earn it. We do not deserve it, but it is a free gift to those who believe. Christ took all our unrighteousness to the cross. He dealt with it. And his sacrifice alone should lead us to pray, to follow, and be glad. We're going to end with a prayer, and I took this from the book, Every Moment Holy. So if you're able, why don't you stand with me as I go through this prayer? Jesus, here I am again, desiring a thing that were I to indulge in it, would war against my own heart and the hearts of those I love. O Christ, rather let my life be thine. Take my desires, let them be subsumed in still greater desire for you until there remains no room for these lesser cravings. In this moment, I might choose to indulge in a fleeting hunger, or I might choose to love you more. Faced with this temptation, I would rather choose you, Jesus, but I am weak, so be my strength. I am shadowed, be my light. I am selfish, unmake me now and refashion my desires according to the better designs of your love. Given the choice of shame or glory, let me choose glory. Given the choice of this moment or eternity, let me choose in this moment what is eternal. Given the choice of this easy pleasure or the harder road of the cross, give me grace to choose to follow you, knowing that there is nowhere apart from your presence where I might find the peace I long for, no lasting satisfaction apart from your reclamation of my heart. Let me build them, my King, a beautiful thing by long obedience, by the steady progression of small choices, that laid end to end will become like the stones of a pleasing path, stretched to eternity and unto your welcoming arms, and unto the sound of your voice pronouncing the judgment, well done. Amen.
We're going to sing in response to what we've heard. We're going to sing about that God we've heard of who walks alongside us, who despite our faults and our weaknesses says, turn to me